Hey guys, so the topic I wanted to talk about today was about the story of Abraham and Sarah. So this is covered pretty much from about Genesis chapter 11 through about chapter 17 or so. So the story of Abraham and Sarah, pretty much to sum it up, they get married before, they're Abram and Sarai, and they get married and she can't have kids, right? And they really, really wanted kids. But because of this, they decided, okay, we're gonna go to Egypt, maybe we'll live better there, so they decided to travel. Well, when they got to Egypt, Abraham told her, you're so beautiful, right? As soon as the Pharaoh sees you, they're gonna take you in. And maybe that's what's for the best, right? So sure enough, they go to Egypt. The Pharaoh finds out, or his people take him or take her to the Pharaoh, and he's like, hey, this girl is beautiful, like I want to marry her, right? So they take her into their palace, and Abraham is like, hey, you have to tell them that I'm your brother, because if not, they're gonna kill me, right? So that's what they do. And he welcomes Abraham into the kingdom as well, and he takes care of them. He marries Sarah without knowing that she was already married to Abraham. Well, as he's taking care of them both, they're going about their business. God plagues Egypt, right? Because God shuns adultery. He hates adultery. So the Pharaoh comes to them and he's like, hey, wait, why is this happening? You didn't tell me that y'all were married, so now we're being punished because of it. So take all the stuff that I've given you, take your wife, and just go away, right? So they came into Egypt and they were blessed. So I guess essentially you could say they found a blessing within a curse. Unfortunately, it had to be taken out on Egypt, but nonetheless, right? So they leave Egypt, and after this, they decided, hey, or Sarah decided, I can't have kids, so maybe you should marry my servant, because at the time you have to get married before you can do anything else. So marry my servant, let her have a kid for you, because I know that is what you want, right? So he does that, and this woman's name was Hagar, right? So he sleeps with Hagar, or he marries her, he sleeps with her, and she gives him a son. So we were talking about how Sarah gave her servant to Abraham to marry and to give him a son, because she knew that in order to continue his bloodline, he needed descendants. So she wanted to give that to him. So she let them marry, she let her have him a kid, and then for some reason Hagar started feeling shunned, I guess, by Sarah. And Sarah started to have almost a little bit of a resentment after she found out that Hagar was pregnant. And she basically told Abraham, like, hey, you need to decide if you want her or if you want me. So he's like, hey, this was your idea, right? So whatever makes you happy, whatever you want to do, because you decided this. So she decided to send Hagar and her son away. And at this time, Hagar went through her own battles, and she's like, hey, God, do you see me? And he said, I am the God that sees you. So, of course, he promises blessings to Hagar's son the same way that he was going to promise a son who would, become the greatest descendant of Abraham and, be fulfilled and blessed. So, Hagar, she was okay. Her and her son were protected. So, later on, there were 3 men that visited Sarah, right? And they told her, like, hey, next year you're going to have a baby. When we come back, you're gonna have a baby. And she's laughing because she's like, hey, I'm old, like, me have a baby, what? And so she kind of had her doubts, right? But the Lord made a promise to Abraham that he would fulfill his deepest desire, and their deepest desire was to have children. Now, selfish on Sarah's part, she later went on to say that Hagar's son, even though this was Abraham's firstborn, she went on to say he would not have the same inheritance as him, as Sarah's son, because know, the way that Sarah looked at it was, you were just a servant brought in. Like, you only have his kid because I allowed you to, right? So that was not great on her part. But she, she kind of shunned the other child, right? And God told Hagar, like, don't worry, and told Abraham, don't worry, I'm not gonna forget your first son. I'm going to bless them both, but your child from Sarah is going to be, he's going to be your main descendant, the one that I give nations to. So, I mean, that pretty much summed up their story, right? But I want to talk more in depth about my interpretation, I suppose. So, for one takeaway that I got, how Sarah shunned Hagar's child, right? Even though this was Abraham's child, I feel like there is a hidden message here talking about, say you get in a relationship with someone who already has a child, right? Because in the situation, Sarah gave up her marriage to Abraham in order for Hagar to marry him, right? So after Hagar and Abraham decided to have a child, and she realized, like, hey, this ain't it, right? She still wanted Abraham, obviously, because that is her husband, and they did this solely for him to have a child. But she ended up not accepting his child, right? Because she held kind of a resentment because Hagar was able to get pregnant, right? So I feel like this could speak a lot on people who get into relationships with others who already have kids, and they don't accept their children wholeheartedly, or they treat them differently than their own children. But aside from that little takeaway, I feel like this story is really talking about the sacrifices that Abraham and Sarah made for each other, okay? Because when they found out they couldn't have kids, right, which was their deepest desire, they went to Egypt, right? And Abraham was willing to give up his wife because he thought that she would have a better life if she were to marry the Pharaoh, right? Maybe she would fall pregnant, or maybe she would just live a fulfilled life and just, just be happy. So by doing so, they separated and they thought that this would be for the best. Well, God ended up bringing them back together, okay, because he showed them, like, hey, I'm going to take you here, and because you showed your sacrifice for each other and for me, I'm going to bless you, and then I'm going to bring you back together, right? So that's why he allowed her, Sarah, to get married to the Pharaoh, and then he gave Abraham all these riches that was blessed through the Pharaoh, right? And after this, he cursed Egypt because it was the sin to commit adultery. We were talking about how Abraham and Sarah loved each other so much that they were willing to sacrifice their own wants and their own needs for each other, right? This was Abraham sacrificing Sarah to go and live a better life and hopefully be fulfilled by the Pharaoh, and how Sarah had sacrificed not being able to have a kid and allowing her servant to bear him a son, right? Because they didn't think that they would ever have kids. Well, this separation showed God that they could properly sacrifice the things that they desired most and loved most, so he blessed them because of it. So he said, because you are willing to make these sacrifices and put your own struggles and your own obstacles aside to benefit one another, I am going to make you come together, for I know my plans for you. You passed the tests while you were separated, and now you will reap the benefits together. So this was the time that he sent those men to share the news with Sarah that she would bear Abraham a son. And it happened. Sarah fell pregnant, and their dream of conceiving and having children had been fulfilled, and God promised them that their son would be the descendant that ruled over many nations, right? He was giving him the fruit of the land, and he fulfilled his promise, right? So this is saying, when the time is right, I, the Lord, will make it happen, right? So this involved a lot of patience and a lot of waiting and a lot of sacrifice, because they went into this thinking that they could not fulfill each other's desires, right? So they, even though they knew deep down that they loved each other, they needed things to be just right. So God showed them that if they could make those sacrifices, and they could overcome their storms while apart, because all this time, mind you, Sarah had been living in the Pharaoh's palace, and Abraham had just been going about his life, just doing what they needed to do on their own. And then God decided, when they were ready, he brought them back together, and he showed them that they could be fruitful and get the desires of their heart, which was, in this case, their child. So God is calling for you to be patient, especially when it comes to wanting a relationship, wanting to be with the one. He is telling you, go through the storms that you have to, the obstacles that you need to face alone, and when the time is right, I will bring you together. God bless.